Good morning, everyone. Uh, this morning I'm going to be working with the essay by Dr. Stephen Aizenstat entitled The Quest for One's Own Red Book in the Digital Age, from this book, Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, edited by Mary Stein and Thomas Arzt. This is volume 3. Okay. Whatever. So today we're going to talk about the consternation that many older people have about the idea of everybody walking around with their nose in their iPhone. And it's not only young people that do that, even I do that. I've walked into a couple of walls in the mall on occasion. And so we need to understand that and understand where it's going for us. And so today I'm going to work up to talking about the woman with many screens and how our process is turning us into cyborgs and how that's a good thing. But in order to get there, first we need some background. If you are watching on YouTube, I will do my best to follow any chat that is on YouTube and respond to it. Let me see. There is one thing I want to get out to you, and that is the link. Just a second. Okay, the link. Okay, yep. All right, so this is the link to get notices of our sessions. I'm going to put this on YouTube. So if you register there, you will be notified for the sessions that you request and not others. And just let me let some people enter here. Good morning, Jordan. And
good morning.
And good morning, Yuan. Thank you for coming again. So today I'm going to be, as I was working up to it, reading from Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions. And I'm working with the essay by Dr. Stephen Aizenstat, who is the chancellor and founder of Pacifica Graduate Institute. And are you familiar with Pacifica, Jordan? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to continue on in the essay from page 378, from where we left off last time. And it's good to have my friend Jordan here to be discussant with me on the topic. But the first thing I'm going to do is read about just over a page, and then we'll talk about that. So page 378, the first full paragraph. Humanity has crossed a threshold in which, on average, we spend over 51% of our time living in cyberspace. For those in their teens and 20s, that number is above 75%. Given this technological maelstrom, many of us fear that cyber technology and artificial intelligence is threatening to supplant psychic life and imagination altogether. That programmed counterfeit images, products of artificial intelligence, are threatening the psychic home ground of the living images that are expressions of an autonomous psyche. Well, all right, so first of all, let me just talk about what Dr. Aizenstat is talking about there. He is talking about the spirit of the age and the spirit of the depths. And the spirit of the age wants our attention all the time. And so we all get sucked into television, screen sucked into our computers and our iPhones and what have you. But the spirit of the depths, which is what Dr. Jung called the 2 million-year-old man, and we've talked about the fact that it's really the 3.5 billion-year-old man, that part of us is an instinctual part of us, and it's why we are here today, because all of our ancestors have done two things, and going back millions of generations, because we're all the sons and daughters of millions of generations. So all of our ancestors have done two things. They've survived until they reproduced. And there's not a break in that chain at all. And good morning, Nick. We're joined by Nick Chan, my friend in Singapore, on the YouTube channel. And so that 3.5 billion-year-old man has given us the instincts to survive and to become our whole selves. And within us are everything that will make us live our lives and become unique individuals, in the same sense that an oak tree is contained in the acorn. And every oak tree is recognizable as an oak tree, but every oak tree is different, and that's the way we all are. So Jungian analysts are concerned about this deep layer, which communicates to us through dreams and visions, among other things, and how that is being supplanted by images that are in effect, fake news. Think of it that way. They are images that have been given to us to on our screens, which are not our real lives. They're maybe education. It might be like a textbook or something like that, but that's not real life. And real life, to give you an example, we're losing about 22 service members a day, or former service members a day, to suicide. And why might that be happening? Well, on reflection about it, I think of young people who have been brought up on video games, and they think this two-dimensional world is the real world, but and so you can just zap some enemy and poof, they're gone. But when Marines and soldiers find themselves in the field and actually in a battle or being attacked or blown up by a IED, then you're in the real world, and that's quite shocking. So you see lots of young men coming back from war, and they have the 1,000-yard stare, and that's because, wow, they thought they were going to be heroes like those guys on the screen, but actually when they actually got into battle, they lost a friend next to them. They were up to their armpits in blood and guts, and that was quite a different world, and so they weren't prepared for it. And so Jungian psychology is about preparing for it and helping us understand what life is really like. So I'll go on. Will our reliance upon technology altogether usurp our spontaneous imaginal lives? Will authentic imagination eventually succumb to computerization of all sorts, including the algorithm manipulation of a marketplace whose single-minded intention is profit-making. Jung noted that to become a knower of the human soul, one must hang up exact science and put away the scholar's gown and wander with human heart through the world. To experience love, hate, and passion in every form in one's body. In today's high-tech frenzy, for example, online time is supplanting the song lines of dream time. Psyche finds herself an endangered species, a forgotten muse. Her poetry, her wisdom, her otherness are diminishing presences. When she does come forth, speaking through dreams or cultural arts most often, her voice is commandeered and channeled in service of the next YouTube stars or cultural trends, which in the end do not become truly big, real, or legit until they have sent a slew of bottom lines into orbit. Today, the Jungian influenced practice of dream tending holds that not all dream images are created equally, because not all dream images are harvested from the same loam. A loam would be a level in geology, for example. Dream images that emerge from the spirit of the depths have been gestated and birthed in the deepest chambers of the imagination, and they make manifest the Neoplatonism of the mundus imaginalis. In contrast, the avatars and computerized images of cyber reality are designed and created from the Aristotelian logic of programmers' codes. While writing this essay, I had a dream in which I saw myself carrying a gun and climbing up 2 circular flights of stairs in a modern building located in the sleek high-rise commercial sector of New Tech, Los Angeles. My strides were purposeful, mechanical, and virtually programmed. I got to the top floor, opened an office door, saw 4 robotic figures, 2 males and 2 females, and pulled the trigger, shooting them dead. I had no emotions. The act felt clean, efficient, and final. Okay, and so this relates to my earlier point about that. Do you have any comment on that, Jordan? I'll look at the YouTube chat while you.
Yeah, especially when you opened up with the constant consternation of older people and a lot of people in general across generations, that so many people walk around the planet with their noses in their phone. And what to me becomes a primary disturbance there, or it's primarily disturbing, is that it seems to create a secondary Linus blanket of sorts that then veils our primary Linus blankets that are our entry rights into self. So it's almost as if people, even if they got past the phone, think they got in, but they still haven't gotten in. So there's a false sense, I find, of going deep, where going deep just simply means being able to watch something for more than 5 minutes.
Right, and so the issue is, we can learn a lot through our screens and our and movies and that sort of thing. And I certainly have learned a lot, and I've known for probably 40 years that I was learning things that I was using in my real life. For example, I estimate that I've probably seen about 4,000 movies in my lifetime. And what I find happening to me now is that every time a life situation comes up of any special sort, I often have an image from a movie come to my mind, and indeed the actual script of the movie, I can actually recite it and say, okay, this guy was doing this and this guy was doing this, and this is about my life right now. And so, that's one of the one of the great things about seeing people on a screen and educating you so that you're prepared for the types of situations that come up in life. But it isn't our life, and life is about experiencing life. It's not about having a vicarious experience of life. So in other words, if you go to an NFL football game, the only guys that are having a real experience are the guys that are down on the field.
Right.
And everybody else is having a vicarious experience, whether they're watching it on television or watching it in the stadium. That's not a real experience of football. That's watching somebody else have an experience. And so if you want to have a real life, a real experience of life, then you have to say, I'm going to live my life, not somebody else's life. And so, it's all well and good to have a soporific Linus blanket, as you said, because sometimes our lives get pretty intense, and that's why we have a weekend, so that we can step away from our lives and just relax and experience things. And we have to understand the difference, which is that when we're watching a football game on television, I watch one a year, which is the Army-Navy game, but no others anymore. But when we're watching a game on television, we have to understand that that's us giving our minds an opportunity to rest and to integrate things that may have happened during our work week. And I used to rail against the fact that at Thanksgiving dinner, the men would all be watching a football game and the women would all be out in the kitchen cooking dinner. And never the twain shall meet. But they would be chatting with one another about the types of things that they face in their lives and understanding how to deal with life. And I now understand that the men were withdrawing so that they could process what had happened to them in the week, and the women were getting psychotherapy from their friends about the things that they hadn't done in their week, and that was their form of integration. And very often those are different worlds, and necessarily so, because we are still human beings. But in any case,
I really resonate with your word vicarious there, because to me that kind of overarches even the Linus blanket. The Linus blanket kind of becomes a little slangy, but at the same time, what's really coming to mind there with that is, especially in the bifurcation example of the men going to process at the television, vicariously watching, and then the women going in to be together in psychotherapy of friendship, which is living. And, so they are living and processing at the same time, and in a way that they don't pause to reflect, they address when it occurs. Or shortly thereafter, hey, I need to talk to you. Can you come over on Saturday, kind of thing. I'm kind of reminded of a butterfly coming from a chrysalis, where if you've ever seen or heard the story of someone who then goes, oh, the butterfly's struggling, I'm going to help it. And they clip the chrysalis open so it's easier to get out. And the butterfly forever crawls around as a fat-bodied vestigial wing caterpillar that can't fly, because the actual struggle to get out and squeeze through the small opening actually pushes the fluid and the life forces into the wings.
mm-hmm.
And if so it feels like then that there's a certain, don't let the butterfly be vicarious, it needs to engage.
Yeah.
And that kitchen scene seems to be that engagement.
Right. And Manuela says here, we've collected a few of our Tarot session friends here. So we have a good group on the YouTube channel. But Manuela says, hi, Skip. I've read somewhere that in younger children, screens images produce the same effects that real life, but on and on we get nonsensible to it, and also less empathic, as you said about games. And when you see murders on TV, first you suffer, but after time, you block the feelings. And Patricia's here. And let's see, Chris, hi, Skip. Hope the participation mystique went well. Well, actually, it didn't go at all, Chris, because we decided to postpone until today because of the election of our new president-elect and the speeches that he and Vice President-elect Harris were going to give last night, which conflicted with our event. And so we're going to do it at the same time today, which is going to be 7 p.m. Eastern time tonight. And that's 4 p.m. Pacific time and 4 a.m. for those of you who happen to be in Singapore. I'm sorry about that timing, but anyway, so we are going to be talking about the collective unconscious and the participation mystique this afternoon, and it's going to be a very interesting session. I've put together images from about 25 people, and we were all keeping images, doing images during the past month leading up to the election. And most of us also did one image after the election to reflect how we were feeling and what we were thinking about the world. And I think a lot of us learned a lot from that experience. And so each one of us who participated is going to talk about their experience and how it emerged in images tonight. And so you haven't missed anything. And I hope you can join us tonight. If I've put at the top of the YouTube channel, the MailChimp link. And if you go there, you can register for Wisdom Path Colloquia, and that will get you later this afternoon the links to join us this afternoon. We're going to have a very active discussion this afternoon. I'm expecting quite a number of people to participate. And so Daniel says, mobile scrolling on social media, news articles, commercials, etc., releases dopamine like a slot machine, constantly giving of chemical rewards to the brain, and that is not a good thing. It's an addiction. When the brain is used to getting such high doses of dopamine, it gets harder to get dopamine satisfaction from normal rewards. I don't doubt that that's true. And one of the things that I'm pointing out is that you do have a life, and if you're going to live it, you have to live it by understanding yourself first as a human animal. And we've had a lot of misconceptions sold to us over several thousand years. We've been sold the idea that, oh, don't worry about this life, just you're going to go to heaven, just go to heaven, just be good and go to heaven. Well, I have news for you. Like all animals, when we die, we don't know we're dead. It's only difficult for our family. And so if you want to be immortal, like somebody like the Buddha or Jesus Christ or Alexander Solzhenitsyn or Beethoven or Chopin or something, or Carl Jung, you better find a creative outlet so that you can leave aspects of your spirit behind, so that your spirit will live on even though your physical body is not living on. And so, and that's one of the main reasons why I've done this YouTube channel, because I have a 9-month-old granddaughter who I hope to interact with in her lifetime, but I've never actually met her because of COVID. And so I want her to know something about her grandfather and what did I think, and how did I go about leading my life. So one of the big reasons that I do this is to leave advice for my grandchildren when they're too young to be able to actually talk to in the physical world, but I can leave my spirit behind so that they can understand what I was about. And I reflect on my grandparents, and I barely remember my maternal grandmother. I remember that she wore a bustle. I remember that because the last time I physically saw her was in 1952 when I was 6 years old. And she actually died 2 years later, but my family was in Kodiak for those 2 years. So I never saw her again after that summer. And my maternal grandfather lived with us for 8 years after her death. And so I do remember him very clearly. And he was the most bigoted man I ever met. And the result of that was I became his doppelganger, opposite, I would say, because he and I just did not get along. And but I've come to respect him for a number of reasons. One of those is that he was in the first class of the Wharton Business School. He actually did graduate, unlike our president, and he served in an honorable profession as an accountant on the Pennsylvania Railway. He was an auditor, an internal auditor, for 50 years. He served in that role, and he, in the pandemic 100 years ago of the Spanish flu, he was engaged to a woman who, together with her 4 sisters, all died on the same weekend, all of them, in November of 1918. They were living in Philadelphia, and Philadelphia had one of the biggest outbreaks, and all 5 girls died on one weekend. And because that happened, because of that flu, we're having this conversation now because my grandfather went on to marry my grandmother, and I wouldn't be here if he had married the other woman who died. So, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. So it's amazing how things turn out in life and what the consequences can be many, many years later. But the only thing, let's see, what do I have? Oh, the one thing I have of him is the gold watch he was given after 50 years on the Pennsylvania Railroad when he retired. That's the only thing I have. And I did have my grandmother's engagement ring, which I gave to my 3rd daughter. So that's no longer with me any longer. But those are the only 2 physical things that still exist from my maternal grandparents. My paternal grandparents, I have a lot of good stories about my grandmother, but I don't have anything physically of hers. And my paternal grandfather, I have his cufflinks, and I have the fact that I live in Annapolis, Maryland, which is one of the most beautiful colonial cities in the United States and the capital of the state of Maryland. And the reason I live here is because my father went to university at the Naval Academy, and Annapolis has always been in my family since I was born. So, so those are the things I have from my grandparents. I can sum them up in 10 minutes. And so I want to leave more of my spirit for my grandchildren than they were able to do in their lifetimes. And so if you're going to have your spirit be immortal, you better think about what you're going to do in this lifetime, because once you're dead, and you're not going to know it. And so dead men tell no tales. So, when my father was, when he was my age, he got scratched by a barn cat, and it became abscessed, and his chest swelled up to double its normal size. And he had refused to go to the hospital because he thought if you went to the hospital, you were going to die. And so finally, it became so painful that if he touched any part of his chest, it was excruciatingly painful. So he did go to the hospital, and he was there in the bed, and he lost a lot of weight. He went down to 112 pounds, and he was very upset. But they had controlled the abscess at that point, so he was out of the ICU. And one time I went in to see him, and he was getting bed sores because he was there about 3 weeks, and he wanted to turn over. So I tried to lift him, help him turn over, and it was like picking up a skeleton. And it was just very gloomy. And I said, well, what are you so upset about, Dad? Why are you so glum? And he says, well, I'm worried about kicking the bucket. That's an American euphemism for dying. And I said, well, don't worry about that. We've had 100 billion people try it. We've got no complaints. Just decide what you're going to do between now and then. And I saw his demeanor change at that moment. And he went on to live another 8 years. And so, for that 3-week period, I was sure he was going to die at that time, but he didn't. And I'm convinced that he didn't die because of that piece of wisdom that I spontaneously gave him. I don't know where that came from, but I clearly remember the event and the fact that his demeanor changed at that moment. And so what we have to understand is that we have actual lives. Dr. Jung was very emphatic that we can have an imaginal life, and we need the imaginal life, but there's two kinds, as we're talking about here. One is the kind that comes spontaneously from where we really live, and the other is a fake imaginal life that can be used. It's like seeing a textbook in a school. You can learn something from it, or you can have a vicarious life, but who's going to live your life if not you? And so you need to stay grounded so that you can come back out of it. And so even during the Red Book period, Dr. Jung knew that he had to keep reminding himself. I live at 228 Seastrasse in Kusnacht. I have a practice of patients that depend on me. I have a wife and 5 children who depend on me. And on and on. He had to ground himself in his actual physical life so that his psyche didn't go off over the horizon on him, which is what does happen if you're mentally ill. And so, so anyway, the lesson that we need to take from that is that who's going to live your life if not you? And, you know, fine to look at television all you want. You know, when my daughter was 5 years old, one of my daughters, she was addicted to soap operas. and and my wife was very worried about it. And I said, well, let her watch all she wants, because she's going to sate herself on that, and then she'll never look at it again. And that's exactly what did happen. She looked at a lot of soap operas between age 5 and age 7, let's say. And as far as I know, she's never looked at another one since then, because her life moved on from that time. And so anyway, okay, so let's see. Chris says, I mean, they say you die twice, one time when you stop breathing and a second time a bit later on when somebody says your name for the last time. That's according to Banksy. And Ashok Bedi, in his conversation with us in April, said basically the same thing, which is once when you physically die, and the second time when no one remembers your name. So it's not a question of saying your name, it's a question of nobody even remembers your name. And you know, I would say that we all have an immortal soul, and a spirit that lives on. It lives on in ripples. It may not be your, you know, it may not be recognizable as your life. I mean, we all look back to Jesus Christ in one way or another, because he lived a life that rippled down through the ages and people kept talking about for, you know, thousands of years. And just think, the Bible itself was not even agreed to until 325 AD. So what do you remember that happened in 325 AD? I mean, or what do you remember that happened 325 years ago? Not very many things, I judge. And so he was able to express his spirit in such a way that it rippled down through the ages and people kept talking about it. And but even if you don't do that, even if the only thing you do is raise a family, you know, that's your spirit going on also. Okay. And so, you know, even though I didn't know that one grandmother very well, you know, her spirit is still with me because I'm talking about her now, and her spirit will continue for a period of time, because I don't think YouTube has a plan to delete anybody's videos. They make money on the videos that people make. So the fact that I've talked about her now, she's going to live on in these videos for a time more, even though she never had any thought of that kind of immortality and didn't know about computers and things. And when she died in 1954. Okay, Jordan, go.
That was a wonderful statement that was brought up about the dying twice. And it runs through so many verses of life hymns. The dancer dies twice, once when they can no longer dance, and then at death. The architect dies twice, the actor, the artist, the orator, the poet dies twice when you can't do what you love anymore. But there is that you were fully living up to that point. And so you bring up a wonderful point too about the legacy for your 9-month-old granddaughter. where we're discussing Jung, what Abraham Lincoln said, you have to learn from other people's mistakes because you don't have time to make them all yourself. you know, um, but,
Right.
but then, then we take the converse of that, and we learn from people's blessings, from their completions. Carl Jung would be always complete and never finished. And it's when we, I think, round our own internal troops and marshal those forces to then not have to explore whole areas of our psyche, because we can get this cliff notes basically, and then find out the parts that we really, really resonate with, that we can explore through our work.
Right. And I spoke, or I had a text message interchange with my oldest grandson last week because he turned 17 on the 4th. And I said to him, I've held back from talking with you all these years because I consider it your parents' job to raise you, and they might consider it interference if I said anything to you about the things that I might teach you. But next year when you're 18, you're old enough to vote and to join the military, and so you've reached maturity according to our society. And at that point, I do have things that I would like to say to you. And he really appreciated that. And I said, just 1 year to go. And so then I was reflecting upon, what it is that I would say to him, among other things, obviously. And Jordan just raised one of them, which is, make mistakes, make a lot of them, make them fast as you can, because that's how you learn, and that's how you grow up and learn to face life. And so if I give anybody any advice that's listening to this, it would be to make mistakes as fast as you can. And I've made them aplenty, but and some of them have been quite painful. But nonetheless, they've made me a better person all of my life. So, Jordan.
And I think right on that point, I find that a lot of people have hurdles, and thank you for that heartfelt expression. Thank you. That's very connective. And I find that mistakes, a lot of people get wrapped up in shame and worry about, quote unquote, being in trouble. And with each of us, there's only one principal in the principal's office, and that's ourself. And we often don't keep office hours. There's no reason to be mean to ourselves. So I've flipped the word mistake to be OFL, opportunities for learning. And it just evaporates the shame out of the equation. And I think then people can stumble and fall and go, oh, wow, you see how hard I hit the ground? I did such a good job at slamming into the earth.
Yeah,
but they get back up.
And we can look at what's happened in our politics and take example, the Proud Boys, so-called Proud Boys. I call them the Lost Boys, and I'll explain to you why. Recently, I learned that they had a fantasy that they could take over several northern states and create a world that was exactly like they wanted, a white supremacist country where they could keep it lily white and pure the way they want it. And they're out in the world in the woods playing with guns and stuff because they think they could do that. Well, the reality is, in the real world, they could not do that, and nobody's going to allow them to do that. And but I have to smile because I had visions of grandeur when I was a boy, but it was when I was 10 years old, and my father was in the Navy. We were living in We were living in Norfolk, Virginia, which is the largest naval base in the world. And my father was assigned to a ship in the Sixth Fleet. And one of the things I happened to hear when I was 10 years old were that there were all these surplus destroyers that were anchored in the York River outside of Yorktown, Virginia. And I said, well, Dad, why don't we take over one of those destroyers and then we can create the Conover Navy and have our own Navy? And and he said, well, you know, that's an idea, Skip. Why don't you write a letter to the Secretary of Navy and ask him to give you one of the destroyers? So I did. And moreover, I got a response from the Office of the Secretary of the Navy. I assume it was auto-signed by some seaman second class or something at the Pentagon. But anyway, I did get a letter, which I wish I had kept, but I obviously kept it in my psyche and my memory all these years. But, you know, it was a very polite letter addressed to me saying that, you know, I'm sorry we don't make our surplus destroyers available to 10-year-old boys. And it didn't say that in so many ways, but, you know, it made me reflect on, you know, why those destroyers were surplus. Obviously they were, because World War II was over and we weren't in a global war anymore. And ultimately those were melted down and turned into something else, I presume. But, you know, people can get going on these fantasy thingies and then all of a sudden they wake up. And, you know, a perfect example is these guys that took it so far that they thought they were going to kidnap the governor of Michigan and try her, have a fake trial, and then murder her. And obviously, you know, that can't be allowed in the real world. It's an interesting fantasy for somebody who's running that fantasy through their mind, but they need to be connected up with reality. And the, I don't know, 20 or so men who had that fantasy, or, you know, a lot of them are going to go to jail now. And so they're going to have a real life experience. And, you know, they may be spiteful and revengeful, but it's also a lesson for all the so-called white supremacists we have in the United States that, you know, that's just a childish fantasy that needs to change, because we don't live in that world anymore, and that there's no possibility of that in the world anymore. And you know, them having AR-15s that they can take out in the woods and shoot up the trees with is not real life. I mean, it's fine for a pastime, and I have no objection to them doing it for a pastime. But when it spills into real life, then you get a real life experience too. And so you have to be able to distinguish between a fantasy and real life. And so that's why I call them the lost boys. It's like the story of Peter Pan, where the lost boys were always saying, I won't grow up, right? And the problem is that Wendy grew up. Wendy grew up and went on to have a family, and the lost boys, you know, didn't grow up, and they were, you know, they didn't have a life. And so if you want to have a real life, a real human life, you're going to have to learn to make a distinction between what's fantasy and what's real. And a couple of examples lately, I mean, the last decade, we've had all these Star Wars style shoot 'em ups, space cowboy movies, where there's a hero and they're, doing all this stuff with screens and so on, and video games to kill all the aliens, right? But there's never any blood, of course. And so, that's fantasy. That, you can learn some lessons from the scripts of those movies, but that's a fantasy. Now, there's another show that Deb and I have watched the first season of, which is quite good by comparison, which is called Away. And it's about a crew of 5 human beings who make the first trip to Mars. And because it's an international endeavor, there are representatives from 5 different countries in the crew. There's an American, an Indian, a Britisher, a Russian, and a Chinese. And there's all this international politics surrounding this thing, but the program, which now has 10 episodes, shows the existential issue of actually getting just to Mars, let alone out into the galaxy, which we've all been imagining since Buck Rogers, I guess. But this show is based on what the real existential issues are of a human being actually getting to Mars. And the first season is about getting there, physically getting there. And of course, there are many crises in this show, but it really expresses some of the human interactions that have to occur during a mission like that. And that's a more realistic something to imagine what it's really like, as opposed to what it's like in the fantasy world. And so you have to be able to make a distinction. I sort of lost my interest in the 007 movies because after From Russia with Love, From Russia with Love did involve a few fantasy items, like a fellow who had a submarine periscope in the Russian embassy, for example. Now, that was a fantasy. But at least From Russia with Love had some contact with real life. But after that, and I guess Goldfinger was okay also. That was the third movie. But after Goldfinger, these movies got into this fantasy, high-tech thingy that isn't real life. And I just lost interest in it. I couldn't get my mind around it. I mean, I enjoyed the movies for a while until they got so repetitive and trite that a few of them I haven't even bothered to go see. But I really preferred those first 3 movies because they were more reflective of what could actually happen in real life. And I've had a couple of my own run-ins in real life, which reflect that style of living and how things can happen. So I want to go on with this article, though. And hello, Thurpo from South Africa. All right, so reading on now. So Dr. Aizenstat has gotten to the point where he's worried, and now I want to get to the woman with many screens, because I'm sure that is what sucked a lot of people into watching this live stream. So we're getting closer. All right. So the next day I was troubled because he had this dream in which he had killed 4 people in his dream, and he didn't have any emotion about it. And so he says, the next day I was troubled. What deep fear and rage had created these automatic beings? More disturbing, what dread had turned me into their cold, calculated assassin? Was my soul engaged in a life or death battle with cyber technology? As much as I gladly join the technological tidal wave every day, relying on it for personal and professional communication and information, I still often feel that I am frolicking in the devil's sea. The devil's sea. Is my imaginative self, like the tenor of my voice, being replaced by mechanistic robotic avatars who are simply carrying out the digital instructions of a programmer's code? That afternoon, I went to a video studio for a 9-hour taping, introducing my praxis of dream tending. Greeting me was a film crew of 10. There were no shortages of cameras, lights, or screens. Highly talented young people were running the studio, and they were astutely aware of the need to meet an exacting set of technological requisites in the making of the film, including search engine optimization, keywords, and digital repurposing. During the first hours of the taping, my robot assassin role in the dream was still haunting me, and I could feel that distress compromising my effectiveness in front of the camera. Then a surprise. In a break between director's cuts, my heart softened, and something other nestled in, a remembering of what brought me to this high-tech studio, fully staffed by millennials who think, breathe, and speak in megabytes. I truly love this generation of young people. I appreciate their intelligence, wit, and agility, particularly technologic, and I am touched deeply when they share with me their yearnings, often of vocation and belonging. I enjoy tending their dreams. Guiding them in this way reminds me how the spontaneous psyche, offering image and sensation, opens the humility of our humanity. Even as we are surrounded by screens, handheld and otherwise, we are tending dreams. Although we are not really offline, we have opened ourselves to sharing the expansive breadth of psyche's beauty. In the midst of the spirits of the times, we are tending the spirits of the depths. Soon after the day of the taping, I had a welcome visit from the woman with many screens, a regular emergent from my dream time. Her cyber wisdom and benevolent techno presence cast further light on the darkness of the robot killer dream. Woman with many screens first appeared 3 years ago. In the dream, I was sitting by a bucolic lake, and she beckoned for me to join her. Together, we traveled through vast imaginal space and landed in her community. Once there, I relaxed and looked around. I had never before seen so many computer screens in one place. The pervasive mood was one of revelation, peace, and creative energy. Every screen was a looking glass through which one could view all aspects of their inner and outer lives. From compassion to competition, from love to hate, all was revealed in their techno-translucent screens. Okay, I'll stop there and see if Jordan has a comment on that.
A wonderful reading, first off. That it takes me back to your whole oak tree and the acorn, and then you move through to then consequences of the fantasy reifying to emerge out here as energy within action, but then it's influenced, and so that oak tree cracks out of the acorn sprouting. That's us. and then wind and weather, and fire and storm, and experience. And there's a consequence to the fantasy emerging. And so, like, as you were talking about the Lost Boys or the Proud Boys, there was a devoidness of consequence that allowed them to allow themselves to run wild like that. And then when you get this Woman with a Thousand Screens, he has this sincere love of the younger generation, rather than, oh, they need to learn this. And it, to me, closed a circle that I had never seen in writing before, where the older generation was embracing that in the younger that they also had, and that there was human connection and healthy society expressed by just that one reading in that one dream. And it's powerfully evocative and emotional in a way that it's real. And that, to me, has a good consequence, the consequence to fill more beauty into those evolution pools. So we can, you kick the bucket as you're spilling your beauty, all of it. But every once in a while we spill a little beauty, and you don't have to clean that mess up. It helps people.
Yeah. Well, it affects me at many levels. I actually had a dream, and it was sort of an ongoing act of imagination that went on for a couple of years. And in this act of imagination, which would come to me as I was falling asleep every night, I would find myself in a control room with about 10 or 15 screens, and other things around them, like the universe and so on. But there were these 10 or 15 screens there, and each one had a different story playing, and I could select which one I wanted for my dream for the night. And so I could actually say, okay, I want screen number 3, and then screen number 3 would open out to me, and there I would be in that story and could have that dream. And it was very, very powerful for me. And I realized that, nowadays, people were just not exposed to much information before, but nowadays we can experience basically not only everything that you could live in the physical planet Earth, but we can experience everything that anybody can ever imagine in our lives through this technology and through these dreamlike experiences, because that's what a movie or a television show is. It's a suspension of disbelief. So you put yourself in that environment for a period of time, a couple of hours or an hour television program or whatever, and you forget everything else around you, and you're right there. And so for that 2-hour period, you can be Luke Skywalker and experience what it would be like in some way. And the better our movies get, the more and more possible it is. So there's huge opportunities. And I remember when I was young, I had certain imaginations about other countries. And first of all, I ended up in Japan at age 15, about 17 years after World War II. And at that time, the Cathedral of Yokohama was still in rubble in Yokohama, where I was going to high school. And for the 5 or 10 years before that, when I was old enough to experience World War II movies and television programs, I had certainly experienced what World War II was like, but I was having trouble making the cognitive shift to what Japan would be like, because obviously the Japanese in the World War II movies weren't coming across very well. And, when I was 15 years old, I was living in a Japanese city. My mother wanted to have the full experience of living in Japan, and so she refused to live on the naval base, which is like Little America. So when you're overseas in the military, if you live on the base, it's going to be essentially like living in any town USA. But my mother insisted on living out in a Japanese city, and she selected Kamakura as the city we would live in, which is the home of the great Buddha. And so getting to Kamakura from the base was about a 20-minute train ride, and to my high school in Yokohama was about an hour trek each way. And so I was 15 years old. I had just learned how the train system worked. My father had taught me. And I had gone to the American Teen Club in Yokohama for a party, a dance party, a sock hop like we used to have around the US. And I left at 11 o'clock and managed to get myself to Yokohama Station at midnight. And I didn't know enough about how the trains worked. And so I went to the platform that I knew said Kamakura in Roman letters on it. And I figured any train that came to that platform would take me to Kamakura. Well, it just goes to show how wrong you can be and how you can make a mistake. But here I am, this 15-year-old boy. And at midnight, I got on a train that was not the train that would go to Kamakura. And, I was having doubts about it. And that train made one stop. And I'll just show you what I saw at that stop, because I have the picture on my desktop. So this is the Goddess of Mercy, which is in Ofuna. And so the one stop was at the station, and this Goddess of Mercy is about a quarter of a mile from the station, and it's lighted up at night. And so I saw her and realized, okay, I'm on my way home. This is something I go by every day, so it should be all right. And so I decided to stay on the train, even though I was having my doubts by then. And then the train's doors closed, and the train didn't stop for 2 hours. And it turned out I was on the express train from Tokyo to Kyoto. And the train went and went and went. And at 2 a.m, it stopped. And by then I'd figured out I was on the wrong place. And I got out on the platform, and it was quite dark. There was like 100-watt light bulb on the platform. And a train man came up to me, and I said, look, with hand and arm signals, when's the next train back? And he just said, Owari, it means it's done. So there were not going to be any trains that night. And it was 2 o'clock in the morning, in the dark, in a strange country where we had been at war in a very desperate war with the country for, the previous 25 years. And fortunately, a taxi cab went by, and I was the last human species on the platform. So he agreed to pick me up. I don't think he knew that I was an American before I was in the car with him. But, I just told him I want to go to Kamakura. And he said, okay, and very diligently got driving. And he had to drive 2 hours along the coast of Japan to get me back into Kamakura, where I could find my way to my home. And it's a long story, but the point is, I had a different respect for Japan after that, and a different way of thinking about it, because that was real life. And there's more to the story, but I've told it before, so I'm not going to tell it further. But the point was that when I later was in international business and traveling all over the world, what I realized was that, if you're in business, every place is more or less the same. There are McDonald's in Tiananmen Square, and if you've seen the inside of one international hotel, you've seen them all more or less. And I mean, there might be a little bit more opulence in a Trump hotel than a Marriott, but it's a distinction without a difference. And, in business, I just found myself in a conference room with other businessmen talking about what we were doing in business, and it's pretty much all the same, which I found pretty disappointing, actually, because I was looking forward to learning about Spain or Italy or whatever, and I'd have a 2-day trip into Italy and I'd never get out of the conference room. But having said all that, we can experience what these places were really like, thanks to the stories and television and movies that we have. And, that's a great thing, because we can experience what it was like to live these lives in the past. And, yes, you can go on a tour of the Ming tombs or the Cabinet War Room in London or whatever it is, and you can see, where Churchill ran the war for the British and what have you. You can come to the US and you can see the Statue of Liberty and what else. But, you're a tourist. You're not living the life of somebody who came in on a ship and saw the Statue of Liberty and realized that they had a new home. That experience isn't there for the tourist per se. And, I remember going in the Statue of Liberty when I was 12 years old and being rather disappointed, because on the inside, it has a lot of holes the size of quarters in the skin of the Statue of Liberty. So if you go inside the statue and look out, you see what looks like bullet holes all through the Statue of Liberty. I don't know if that's still the case, because they did do a renovation on the statue some years ago, and I haven't been there since then. But at that time, which was more than 60 years ago, it was in rough shape from the inside. But, outside, it's the symbol of freedom. So you learn that, the image that you have in your psyche may be different from the actual living of an experience. And so the great thing is that we have the chance in our age of having all these experiences and having our pick, the multiple screens that you can pick which one you want to have as your imaginary life today. And that's real. I mean, my mother-in-law, who's 90 years old, she was a librarian, and she basically had a very plain vanilla life of a mother in rural Maine. My wife and she lived on a potato farm for many years. But because of books, she was able to go out and have an experience. And now we don't have to read books, we can listen to them. So she's thrilled because her vision is not the best anymore, and so now she can have audiobooks. And she just read The Source, and she read Hawaii, and she's thrilled because she can have those experiences, and so on. And so those are the good things of having our computers. We just have to be able to differentiate between what's actually life and what isn't. And we need to live a life that way. So, okay, your turn to talk, Jordan, and then I want to go finish this passage in this book.
Something just short. It came to me as you were finishing up there that reading takes time, and that requires focus, discipline, and effort. And then staring at your screen, and you've hit the hyperspace button, and you're not even immediate gratification, you're just dopamine there. And so I'm wondering about the distinction that's missing from the screen can be the work that's required to actually have the experience.
Yeah,
and
obviously.
And I think that's that, because you said distinctions without difference, where when in Rome, you were in Rome all over the world, it didn't change. Instead of dropping out to the tourists or to the citizens, then people who live there, and say, okay, I'm not going to check the list off. What's important to you here, with no qualification? They're like, oh, you have to see this park, but then keep walking and you'll want to drop down by this tree and there'll be some statue. And you just have that expansive feeling that you are now in a different place. So the experiential Absolutely. And the time and the effort, even the reading audiobooks, the hearing is then substituting the time, the discipline, and the effort to focus and sit or walk around and experience the story.
Yeah. And, the richest experiences I had in India, and in the last 30 years, I've been there 44 times. The richest experiences was when I grabbed my colleagues by the throat and said, you will take me out and show me some of the sites. I'm not going to sit here in this hotel and in these business meetings and only do that after flying for 24 hours. Together.
Well, that's the funny thing about conferences too. I remember I'm going to this place, and then I'm in Paris, France, and I never left the hotel. And then the second time I'm there, like, oh, I'm here. But I got home. Oh, what's France like? I said, it's like a lobby, and it's like a business meeting. Like, because you go to Orly, you get in the cab, you are then shuttled into the porte-cochere of the hotel, and then stuffed into the lobby. You actually were almost never outside.
Right.
Okay.
So anyway, that's what that's about. So let me go on with this, because we're talking about the woman with many screens, and I want to wrap up this section at least. So in Woman with Many Screens, Neighborhood, the projections omitted empathy and understanding. Misunderstandings, territorial conflicts, anger, and shame gave way to collective harmony and mutual regard. I was fascinated by the thousands of live computer screens. The atmosphere was humming. Individuals communicated to one another verbally and through their translucent computer screens. These cyborgs were living in a blended, harmonious community with capacities for love and compassion far beyond our own. They were more humane than humans, and upon waking, I felt an overwhelming sense of awe and deep regard. Sound utopian? You bet. And what a place to visit. I have come to feel affection for the kind of expressive faces of women with of many screens and her hybrid computerized neighbors, this thriving cyberhuman community has helped me recognize that rapidly advancing technology need not be dire. If we are vigilant about integrating advancing technology with the inner realities of dreams, imagination, and personhood, there is no threat to the depths of the spirit. Upon waking from this most recent visit to Woman with Many Screens vibrant community, mind you, he's talking about a dream he was having, my first thought was, maybe our contemporary dilemma is not a matter of technological threat, but instead could be a matter of technological evolution, in which cyberspace offers another complementary dimension of a new extending dream space. Woman with Many Screens has been a frequent companion in my daily digs, and her affable cyber presence in my dreams is a stark and enlightening contrast to my recurrent fears in the waking world that our imaginal lives are on the brink of a high-tech takeover. Her presence is particularly reassuring to me because in today's world, in one way or another, we are all cyborgs. A luminous guide, Women with Many Screens, traces a lineage reaching back to the ancients, yet her wisdom imbues light into the present and future. Her visions make it difficult to divide today's technological universe into incompatible opposites, good and evil, dark and light. Advanced technology and deep imagination can coexist and enhance each other. In dream images, as dream images become increasingly hybrid, some being both technological and imaginative, we must embrace the human, mechanical, and psychical as one. I am reminded of Joseph Campbell's observation that simultaneous levels of existence function in concert, the corporeal of waking consciousness, the spiritual of dream, and the ineffable of the absolute unknowable. Okay. Jordan.
Well, the simultaneous levels of experience, dimensions, it sparks in me the idea of our inner self, capital S, and then now we have this outpouring of internal code, data, and that there's difference and newness, which makes it somewhat sympathetic, fight or flight, awareness versus parasympathetic, which would be beauty that we're acclimated to and we're fluid with. So I wonder, I think the advanced technology concept is very, very resonant with me because I feel almost like when Mac versus PC. The Mac was plug and play and intuitive, easy. It just looked like if you could open a filing cabinet, you could use the computer. And then now they're both similar, and we're getting more to this, I think, ability to dance rather than just walk. And I think as we enter that ease where our intuition with the actions is an informed intuition with the technology, and then we are no longer hindered by it averaging out the average in a way to give us a piecemeal kind of half-baked experience where we're actually, like you just indicated there, the experience is actually a new experience that is provided.
Yeah, and I think that we have to remember, we have to look at reality in our lives. The Lost Boys have this fantasy that they can create a separate country that's whites only. And that just isn't going to be possible. Even if you tried to physically do it, you couldn't do it because that imaginary country would need to interact with the rest of us. And as soon as it interacts with the rest of us, then there are white girls or white guys that fall in love with an Indian American man, or in the case of my daughter, a Korean American man who's a perfectly fine human being. He's a radiologist who provides a good household for our family, for a third of my grandchildren, and and they live an American life. It's not like it's anything that is difficult to comprehend, and we have a blended life today. And I think that more and more we're going to see that people see that and understand that, and understand that this white supremacist fantasy is just that. It's a fantasy, and it doesn't even hold up in the fantasy space, because, okay, let's say you take over South Dakota and North Dakota and Montana, and you make a country into that. And then what?
Exactly.
Where are you going to get your iPhone?
Well,
right.
And there are your consequences right there.
Right.
That temper the fantasy.
Right. And so those fantasies, I mean, look, I understand the instinct to play with guns in the woods. Okay. I joined the U.S. Marine Corps during the Vietnam War, and I did it voluntarily. I was the only member of my little lefty college class to be commissioned on graduation day from college. And, when you join the Marines, there's a real wake up call for a lot of people. It wasn't particularly for me because I was raised in the military, but the very first class of OCS, the very first one, was a physical training class. And there were probably 800 guys out on this field, and the teachers were captains in the Marine Corps, lieutenants in the Marine Corps, who were up on a platform. And I remember, and it was during the Vietnam War, we all knew we were going to go to Vietnam. And I remember the very first words out of the instructor's mouth. And those words were, Vietnam, gentlemen, is a very hostile environment. In order to survive in that environment, you are going to have to be in the best physical condition of your life. And we're here. We're here to build you into that. And so everybody was highly motivated to get themselves in good physical condition. And, it wasn't a fantasy. It was the hard work of building up your strength and your stamina so that you could survive. And even OCS, although it's difficult, it's nothing like actual combat. I mean, training like that, or training like we have over here at the U.S. Naval Academy, it's difficult. Okay, when you go into Bancroft Hall at the Naval Academy, it looks like a beautiful building. It's the largest dormitory in the world. And if you're a freshman, a plebe at the Naval Academy, you're required to jog, what they call chop, down the center of every corridor. And every time you turn, you have to turn in a squared fashion and shout something like "Go Navy" or "Beat Army." And when there are 1,200 kids that are doing that about 18 hours a day from 6 in the morning till, or 16 hours a day, no, 18, 6, I don't know, however many hours a day, 18 hours a day, from 6 in the morning to 10 at night. There's quiet at night when everybody's trying to sleep, but the rest of the time it's bedlam. Okay, and it's bedlam all year, every year, while you're at the Naval Academy. But that's just a screening exercise for who can take it. Okay, in Marine Corps OCS, a third of the people who come to OCS thinking that they can become a Marine officer leave without, on their own request. They don't stay because they can't even take that much. And one of the things that we do at OCS is conditioning hikes. And I went through OCS twice, once as a candidate and once as a staff platoon commander after I'd come back from Vietnam. And on these conditioning hikes, we go through what's called the Hill Trail, which is a 3-mile trail, and it's very steep trail, but it's Hill 200, which is 200 feet above sea level. And so the maximum that you're climbing on the uphill side is 200 feet. But in Vietnam, I was on Hill 865, and that was 865 meters above sea level. And that too was vertical. And I was in actual combat at that time. Nobody shoots at you at OCS. and so that's about 2,000 feet, not 200 feet. And just to give the orders of magnitude here. So we have to understand what real life is as opposed to fantasy life, and seek to get into real life. Otherwise, you're living somebody else's life. And Thurpo says, few people will be able to have a legacy like yours, Skip. Well, that's not true. Anybody can do it, but they have to commit to living a real life. And that means not living somebody else's life through Vicarious, because it's why I've never worried about artificial intelligence. Yeah, you can have artificial intelligence. You can make it extremely smart. You can make it mimic a human being all you want, but it has no depth. Okay, and so it can never outthink a human being. Life will always find a way. And one of the things that Jordan and I are working on, and some of my friends who are listening here, is the Tarot. And why is the Tarot important? It's important because there are forces in our lives which are unchanged since the beginning of the human species. They're everywhere and always the same, and always have been and always will be, because or at least for the next million years, because evolution per se, the change of our physical being, takes place extremely slowly. And so we can evolve our technology, but we have to stay in touch with our physical being, our real lives. And the significance of the Tarot is that it shows how so many people from so many different cultures and from so many different ages can point back at these invisible forces that do exist in our lives and see them in very different ways, but they are always and always exactly, always and everywhere exactly the same. And that's why on Monday nights, we're teaching the Tarot as a roadmap for life, because if you don't understand those invisible forces, then you're not going to be able to live your life either. And so Jordan, go ahead.
Skip, I just, right when you finished there, the invisible forces, I have a question back to OCS, where that bedlam of mayhem, noise, and trouble, but with discipline actions running all the way through it. with a form. Do you feel that that actually set the seed stage for you to then acclimate, to then function in highly sensory overload environments without being fight or flight, where you still could think, feel, and perform? Do you think
Of
that
course
was
it
kind
does.
of, yeah?
Of course it does. But
It could,
the fact is, not all humans that are born of a mother have the capacity to even get that far. And so officer training programs are about finding out who has the right stuff and who doesn't.
right.
Because if you can't survive a couple of tough PT sessions on the officers or the obstacle course at OCS, you're sure as hell not going to be able to lead Marines in combat. And the object of OCS is to develop or to screen. It's to screen in 10 weeks, to screen to find out who has the potential to lead 50 Marines in combat. That's the objective. And then once you get commissioned in the Marine Corps, then you go to the basic school where you learn the skills that it takes to lead 50 Marines in combat. And the reason experience and building up in the service is so important is because the people that don't have that experience rely on you for their lives. I remember reading a op-ed in the Wall Street Journal one time, and this guy was talking about having been a Marine in combat in Vietnam, and he talked about how exposed he felt when his company commander was killed, because he said, I was so shocked because I was depending on that guy to get me through it, to get me back home safely. And when he was killed, I didn't have, a private doesn't have the knowledge and information that a captain has, or a major, or a lieutenant colonel going right up. And those things are built up over time. And this is why the Trump presidency failed, because he thought he could lead the country with no experience in the government, with no experience of how things work. And so, yeah, I mean, you can get the job by being elected, and people will salute and play ruffles and flourishes for you and fly you around in Air Force One, but you're not going to be able to lead anybody out of a paper bag. And that's what has happened in this past 4 years. He's demonstrated the inability to do that. And so make sure that your leaders have optimum experience. I mean, the nice thing about the military is we know clearly who has what experience. So we can see where you are in the pecking order by what you wear on your shoulders or your sleeves. Mm-hmm. And we can read your resume on your chest by the ribbons you wear. Okay. And you know who has earned the right to be followed and who hasn't. And people are trained to get through all kinds of situations. And it's not just any 18-year-old with a dream that can go out and be a U.S. Marine. It just doesn't work that way. And so that's true of all of life, actually. I mean, you can have fantasies, you can learn from fantasies, you can learn from television and movies, but if you don't go out and get actual experience, and if you don't make mistakes, then you're never going to be able to lead men. And so, an 18-year-old can put on a uniform and look like a general, but that doesn't make him a general. So, Brad Pitt and all these actors that have played generals in the movies, they don't have the right stuff. It's a facade. It's a fantasy. I mean, even George C. Scott, who played Patton quite admirably, and I watched the movie probably 50 times at least, but he knew what his limitations were very, very clearly. And, George C. Scott wouldn't have been able to lead the Third Army through Europe after D-Day. Not at all. But he knew that. and so the question is knowing what your limitations are, getting out there and having some experience and finding that out, and knowing the difference between playing guns in the woods and actual combat, and knowing the difference between an AR-15 and a 175 howitzer, or gun, or a 155 howitzer. Okay, there's a difference, and a howitzer can stand away from you by 10 to 20 miles and drop you dead in your tracks, and so your AR-15 isn't going to do anything for you. And so there's nobody that's going to take away 2 or 3 northern states of the United States and get away with it. How are they going to live then? They're going to live on the land? Okay, that's primitive. But they're never going to get away with it because their government has tanks and artillery pieces and F-18s and infrared satellites that can see them in the dark. so if that vaunted civil war were ever to get started somewhere, yeah, it can happen. People can get some cockamamie ideas, but it's not going to last very long. They'll get squashed like a bug. And so it's one thing to take guys out in the woods for the experience. And I remember talking to a fellow when I was OCS as a candidate, and saying to my bunkmate, this is everything I always hoped the Boy Scouts would be. And that's about right. I mean, it was playing in the woods, learning how to get around in the woods and go for hikes and that sort of thing. And it's all well and good, but the Boy Scouts aren't in combat. Okay.
Right.
And you find out pretty quick who can handle it and who can't. So anyway.
Skip, you brought up a wonderful counterpoint by contrast when you mentioned, for example, the last 4 years and no experience versus the military. And what's interesting, especially orders, because, for example, it's not so much that I'm done with not having a complete sentence from a particular politician for 4 years. It's the fact that in the incomplete, repetitive, broken record sentences, where's the noun? Where's the subject? Where's the substance? Whereas in the counterpoint of that, with the military, you have your orders. And it's not clarity of vision, not just clarity of vision. There's clarity of mission and purpose and the implementation procedures required to put those in action. And the marked difference between the two could not be more vast.
That's for sure. And if you're a young person that's looking toward the forward part of your life, you have to think about the difference between what's fantasy, and what's imagination, what's education, and what's life, and what are you going to be facing in the next century. Okay, I don't know what it is. I mean, the world has changed 15 times in major ways in my lifetime, major ways. Mm-hmm. And it's only accelerating. And so, we can point to all kinds of examples, but So yes, you need the technology in order to keep up with these changes. I mean, I've watched the internet enter a new generation like every month. Every time I get a new piece of equipment, it's obsolete as I walk out of the store. And
I remember in college being so magically mesmerized, going to the library to use the VAX in Lubbock, Texas, to talk to someone in Austin.
yeah.
Wow, on the computer. So, and then that
Jordan,
was just typing.
can you keep talking while I make a quick bio break?
Certainly.
All right, keep talking.
The the kicker of the evolution to me is not even how fast it's overturning and cycling. It's where was it before? So it becomes a new language or communication system, as it were. And it feels to me we're all in that catching up. And I think people, millennials and younger, who have grown up with this actually have a more fluid fluency with it, and that then they become teachers of the people who grew up on other things and have bridged over to what's now. So it feels like we're in a confluence time between the different generations, rather than a, back when I was your age, I walked uphill both ways in the snow kind of old joke. And I think that as Skip brought up here, distinctions without difference. I find that we have distinctions of all of our ages, but there's no difference in terms of our inner worlds and the archetypal and immutable, solid, stable, and natural concepts that function within all of us. And there's the old quote of, we're all different, like everyone else. And I was going to chuckle with that, because it kind of embraces the encapsulation of how do we self-describe in such a way that we can give definition to ourselves, but not box ourselves in by defining absolutely every little thing, and we allow experience to move us forward and interact and connect. I really appreciate today, Skip, bringing this particular work at this particular point in this work together with the woman with many screens. It brings to mind the lifting of veils. There's a concept of nudity in a star, that a star needs no veil. So these things that bring us forward are to be seen and experienced. And I think it looks like Skip is on his way back.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. So one of the things that we're trying to teach through this YouTube channel in various ways is how to get in contact with your deep unconscious, because that's the part of you that is the ruler of your life, whether you know it or not. I mean, it's like the oak tree. The acorn doesn't know how to become an oak tree, but it carries in it all the elements that are going to make it a 200-foot tree that's one of the strongest in the world. And you have a seed in you that's like that. Okay, every one of us has a part of us that is actually controlling our lives. And I don't mean everything is pre-planned. It isn't, because you run into the unexpected. In my case, I broke my leg. So I served in the Marine Corps for 23 years, and then I broke my leg, and I wasn't serving in the Marine Corps anymore. and I was expecting to stay around for another decade probably, but that just wasn't happening. And so our deep unconscious is the part of us that keeps us going, even when you run into adversity, even when that 15-year-old boy got left off on a train station at 2 o'clock in the morning with no lights and no trains coming the other way. And so you have to get in touch with that. Now, this Sunday morning program that I've been doing has become that for me because I demonstrate it. I demonstrate what Ernest Hemingway said. Ernest Hemingway was asked how he wrote his novels, and he said, "I open a vein and bleed." Okay. And so it was metaphorical, of course, but he was going into his deep unconscious and letting things come out. Like For Whom the Bell Tolls was based on his personal experiences in World War I as an ambulance driver, for example. And so he had a lot of stuff in there. For me, the way I've been handling these sessions on Sunday morning is to read some part of a passage from Jung's Red Book for Our Time, and that instigates my unconscious to think about things that I probably wouldn't think about in my day-to-day life. And once I open that vein, then I talk. And, even today, and Jordan probably has the same experience, I have no idea what we've talked about today, in point of fact, in my ego mind, in my conscious ego mind, because it's my deep psychology that's been presenting things for your consideration. And so that's the way I do it. And it's the way a pastor does it on Sunday morning. He's writing a sermon, he picks a passage from the Bible, they read the passage before the sermon, and then he gives the sermon because he's written it or he speaks it from his deep unconscious, from his own experience and knowledge. And that's what we all need. We all need to be able to be in contact with that part of ourselves in order to live the best lives we can. And so the way to do that is to find some creative part of yourself that you can interact with, and that will get your psyche going and talking to you. And Jung's Red Book is only an example of a very highly educated man who was already a professional psychiatrist of some 15 years experience. But that's how he wrote the 20 volumes of the collected works. Almost all of them were written after he opened the vein to his psyche and started to pay attention. And so, but there's no clear path on how to do that. In King Arthur and the Round Table, the 12 knights of the Round Table went looking for the Holy Grail, and the way they did that was each one entered at the point in the forest that was darkest to them, and that's how they looked for the Holy Grail. And the point is that the Holy Grail is within you, and individuation is the Holy Grail. If you can experience the fullness of life as your acorn thinks you should, then you're going to have a very rich and rewarding life. But if you live somebody else's life vicariously, then you're just sort of thinking protoplasm on the planet. and so you have to understand that there's a qualitative difference between the two. And a friend of mine, I built a company to a public company on my back porch, and we had to get it financed about 10 different times by venture capitalists. And every time we succeeded in getting the money invested, my partner would say, well, now we've done that and we're through and we're set. And I would say, no, we aren't. We're not through at all. And I was the one that was right, because we had to raise money 10 different times. And it just gets you to the next plateau is what it does. And so that's what your education does. That's what any experience does. It gets you to the next plateau, but you're never done. You're never through. And, getting a diploma from college isn't going to mean your life is over. It means you've learned how to begin it. Mm-hmm. And go ahead.
Sure. I was going to say, I mean, I remember my thesis advisor in college when I finished my thesis, and he said, you, Mr. Wordsmith, should understand that your commencement, your graduation is not the prize. What do you think? And I went, I hadn't thought about that. To commence, I'm going forward. I am going to commence the remainder of my life. And he's like, okay, you're good. We'll let you through now. And so I didn't realize I was in a trick trap, but I appreciate you brought up Hemingway, because he said that in a variety of ways, in a variety of formats, the concept always the same. Someone was talking about writer's block to him, and he said, well, writing's not difficult at all. I just need to sit down at my typewriter, lacerate open a vein, and bleed. And Jung did that. And what I find it's interesting, this programming here, Advanced Reading Group, the Tarot as a Roadmap for Life, the groups you're setting up, further than a legacy for your 9-month-old granddaughter, further than a legacy for all of us, they include what primary piece I resonate with Jung about. The emotion and the feeling is required. It's a requisite feature. And so it's not dry, pedantic teaching that rote memory learning. You bring the feeling. And I do resonate with my ego mind has no idea what we talked about. It's a matter of listening, feeling, and engaging. Very verbal. And that you do that here. And so then, frankly, it's one of the things I appreciate most about it.
Yeah. You have to remember that everything, okay, here's my coffee cup, everything that is in the room where we are depends on logos, on the logical mind, because, my college couldn't have the college crest on this without somebody engineering how it's going to get there. And this is actually reset. Or deep set into here. So it had to be drawn by some sort of laser or something. But everything that we have is engineered, and that requires the logos. There's no doubt about that. Nobody's dumping on the logos. We need the logos for every physical thing that we have in our lives. And it has to be 100% perfect. If it's not perfect, you're not going to buy it, whatever it is. It could be a pencil, it could be bubble wrap for something you're going to ship, whatever it is, it has to be perfect in order to fulfill its function. But we don't live in the logos. We live in the eros. That's the point. And that's the magical thing that Jung pointed out and demonstrated. You have to have a life. And so, what I do is I open a vein and bleed these Sunday mornings. I'm thinking about doing it on a daily basis, because these have become the second most popular programs that we do. The most popular have been the Tarot, believe it or not. I mean, we do our wisdom path sessions, and those are quite popular, because we're bringing in somebody who has experience and knows something, and we'll be doing that this afternoon. But the whole idea is to point out that we live our lives in the eros, not in the logos. We use the logos to get us to where we are. We build our civilization to get us to where we are. And, sometimes if we focus too much on the logos, and men tend to do that, we can get a cockamamie idea like that we can secede from the United States and run a white supremacist nation. That's a pretty cockamamie idea, and that can get a lot of people killed. But
and as we all know, only Texas has that written in their constitution that they can do that.
Yeah, but even they wouldn't be allowed to in this day and age. And even if they could do it, then they can't live without the rest of us. So,
right.
They'd have a hard time with finding an iPhone if they were going to live by themselves. And so we have to have discernment, and we have to learn what's a idea and what isn't. And what the important thing for women in all this is that, men can get a cockamamie idea that's based on logos, and they can structure it up to the point where they think they ought to have a war. And it's always the women that put the civilization back together, invariably. They may not be doing it in a very fancy way, but when all the men were killed after World War I, it was the women that put Germany back together to the point where it could have another war, World War II. And meanwhile, the winning men had the cockamamie idea that you could punish the Germans, and that's what they did in the Treaty of Versailles. And so what Adolf Hitler did was talk about the Diktat of Versailles in every one of his speeches. And that just reminded the Germans of how angry they were about how vengeful the winners were, and they wanted to give it another go. And it was after World War II that the Americans, with their wisdom, started the Marshall Plan, and we rebuilt Germany and Japan. And today, Germany and Japan are our strongest allies. And so that's a lesson that we need to ponder on, okay, and think about. And we can't just get some cockamamie idea and then run off half-cocked and think that that's good. And I'm sure that there will be a lot of people that are angry this week that President Trump has lost his re-election bid. But I'm also equally sure that a year from now, it'll be difficult to find anybody who will admit that they supported Trump.
Skip, I think what's interesting that you mentioned the Marshall Plan. I just noticed you kind of have the Marshall Plan of the three different groups I'm in with you. And that I'm like Manuela from Argentina showed up. Yes. And from the tarot as a roadmap for life. And there's a cross-pollination that's occurring in what I've always had this with the confluence of all these ideas. They all arrive at the same place. But it's nice with the three distinctions that have difference, but then your different programs with different formats in terms of concept and talking point are all really working with the same thing. And I appreciate that. Literally, I get three different kinds of perspectives every week. Well,
thank you. That's good to know.
And me, who I can jump all over the place and such. It's important to me because it actually stops stirring the pot and allows it to calm a bit. And then that way, all the things that are feeding it can clearly fuel it.
Right. So at the end here now, I want to wrap this up because I have another 3-hour session to run this afternoon, and I'm not quite finished with preparing for it. But these things have evolved in my own mind as well as, so it's not that I'm static and I have some fixed idea that is the right idea and everybody should follow it. I have no fixed idea. But what I have learned is that this group, which was originally intended for Yuan, because she's unable to listen to the program on YouTube, and can only listen to it live. And so I started doing this at 8 in the morning on Sunday mornings specifically for that. And what's evolved in the last, 12 or 15 weeks is that I've learned about myself that I can open a vein by starting to talk about these essays that are here in this book, and that will trigger a flow of knowledge from me. I don't know if it's profound. Everybody has to make their own judgment, but it's good to have somebody to talk with about it, and that can rein me in too from time to time. But this, what I've seen is the value of opening up this vein, and so I probably will start to do it more often. I have to figure out when, and I have to figure out a time that's most appropriate. I probably will continue the Sunday mornings at 8, but if I'm going to do it every day, I can't do it at 8 o'clock every morning. That's not going to be possible. So I'll have to think about what the best time zone match is. But anyway, I can see the value of using this as a way to open the vein. As far as the Monday night session, which is the Tarot session, I started just by learning a rote approach to doing a divination, and I didn't see the bigger picture of how it can help us develop psychologically, and I didn't see the bigger picture of the fact that these archetypes that are in the Tarot are actually the archetypes we all face everywhere and always will. And when people start to understand that and start to understand what the Tarot cards refer to in our lives, then we're going to have richer lives because of that. And we're going to be able to educate our children better about what sorts of issues they're going to run into in their lives. And we don't have enough advice on that anymore. And it's not that either Jordan or I have any fundamental wisdom on it, but just that we can open up the thought to you. And there was a question for you. Let's see, where was that? Okay, so Patricia asked the question. I think she means you, but she said, Jason, she said, would you elaborate more? What is it that you mean by immutable concepts?
Immutable concepts are those things which, regardless of influence, are unchanged. So an immutable concept could be an archetype. no matter what we do with it, to it, for it, about it, around it, it's still what it is. So just the concept, the definition of the word immutable is that which is unaffected by influence regardless. If that resonates to say anything.
Yeah, and so that's what the Tarot is. The Tarot represents immutable concepts, and the reality is that the Tarot has not changed in 600 years, and so that's a pretty immutable set of concepts there.
It is, and actually, what's interesting about the word immutable almost tends to indicate something solid, which it's not matter. So if you use the Aristotle's concept of the unmoved mover, and that which was, it's usually immutable is usually conceptual, soulful, or spiritual in a larger scale that's bigger than us, rather than being something that matter that could be broken down.
Right. And so Patricia, thank you. She said she likes my predictions. I appreciate that. Manuela says, hi, Jordan. It was very funny to listen to you in a session talking about the Argentinian movie, Man Looking to the Southwest. As you said, we are all here looking for more meaning in our lives. And then Patricia says, Jordan, I'm sorry I got your name wrong. Okay, so.
No, in fact, I actually say, Patricia, I get at that all the time, to the fact that I have a series of 3 jokes. I get Jason and I say, no, I don't have Argonauts. I get Justin and I'm not the conqueror. And then I get Jared and I say, no, I'm not a jeweler. So I think what it is Jordan is such a common name, river, country, but not like Bill, that is like a Smith that's really used a lot. So it's common and understood, but I think people then just play the synonym game, and it's 2 syllables. It usually starts with J, it ends with N, and I'm like, I've been called so much worse. So thank you for calling me Jason, because I always get a kick out of it.
And this is Patricia, who is in our Monday night group also.
And that makes it even better. I mean, we know each other. So, I mean, the fact that even knowing and someone would still flip the name, there's something in there with the 2 syllables, the J and the N, that I think it's just the higher incidence of some other name you said more will come out quicker than the Jordan part. So right. I get a kick out of it.
And then speaking about the third series of things we're doing, which is the advanced reading group on Wednesdays. I initially started that to be a graduate teaching course in Jungian Psychology, and we actually do have in our Dropbox full courses on ion researches into the self, and on Memoriam Conjunctionis, which is a 45 2-hour plus sessions, and ion is 32 2+ hour sessions, and those are available not on YouTube but in our advanced reading group, which everyone is invited to join if you wish. We do ask a small donation of $10 a month, which helps defray the cost of the increasing technology it's taking to do all this stuff. Because I suddenly start getting bills for $200 from Zoom and so on. So they do, to a certain extent, defray the cost, but I don't do this to earn a living at it, and never expect to. Now, we do have a session this afternoon, though. I want to mention that again. At the top of the YouTube chat, you'll find a link. That is the link to our mailing list. And a little later today, I will be sending a final reminder to people about that session tonight, which is at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Pacific Time. And that is going to be an absolutely fascinating session. And when I send out that reminder notice later today, I will be giving the links to join that discussion. And so if you think you might want to join us, make sure that you're signed up for Wisdom Path Colloquia at the MailChimp site. And do that before I send out the notice or you won't get it. And so it's going to be Colleen Kibert, who is very capable and who came up with the idea of doing doodles as a way of getting to your unconscious and understanding what's going on. And her idea is, and I concur with it entirely, is that that if we each draw a doodle, it can look like scribbling at the beginning every day, that we'll have a record of what's gone on in the collective unconscious of the United States and the world. And so we've done that for a month, more than a month. At starting in late September, we have started to do our drawings, and we're going to have 3 or 4 from everyone who participated, about 25 people in that session, and each one will talk about what was going through their mind. And we accepted 3 from before and 1 from after the election. And so you can see how the psyche of the participants evolved over the time. And I'll just say that I've been predicting that Trump would lose in a landslide for 6 months. I never doubted it. That is demonstrated in my drawings, and he literally was the fading figure in my shadow side. He was holding up a big part of my shadow for quite a long time, but he gradually faded away. And so you'll see how I presented that at the end of this evening's session. And,
Skip, I want to say that I resonate most with your prediction and your statement that this election was won in 1918. Not at the other pandemic, but by the women, 1920, this women's suffrage movement, so that the women's right to vote, suffrage, would end the suffering.
Absolutely.
That was such an excellent historical point, just cyclically.
Yeah, the election was decided on May the 19th, 1920.
74 million people voted. I mean, so it's the highest count in history.
So a century ago, the decision was made, and you'll see that I never doubted this during the time. And people say, how can you say it was a landslide? Well, it's very easy to see that this was a landslide, because even though the landslide didn't change most of the red states, it vastly changed the way they are. And so states like Texas and Georgia and Florida have vastly changed their perspective, and they are changing them demographically. And so you can just look at the vote totals and you can see, well, maybe we didn't overcome a 20% control by Trump, but we overcame 19.5% of it. and that sure looks like a landslide to me. And
it wasn't a rout. but it was a landslide in regards to the vastness of the movement.
Absolutely.
That's a landslide.
Well, and it was a rout. It was a rout, although it isn't reflected by a change of those states yet. My point is the GOP has to be shaken in its boots right now, because they have to clean up their act, or they're not going to get back in office for a generation.
It's created a new accountability.
Yeah, absolutely. And so anyway, I've got to wrap this up. I regret having to turn it off when I have so many people watching on YouTube, but I do have to prepare for this afternoon. So
big thing today.
Yeah, if you want to come, if you're on YouTube now and you're not signed up for one of our mailing lists, please make sure you do that between now and, let's say, 4 o'clock Eastern time today. And
7 Eastern, you mean 4 Pacific, right?
Well, the event is 7 Eastern time, but I'm going to send out the reminder
at 4 Eastern. Got you.
At 4 Eastern. So if you're not on the list by 4 Eastern, you won't be getting the link to the Zoom session, and you won't be able to participate except by watching YouTube. But then we won't hear what you're saying. We might see your comments, but if you want to participate in the group, and it's going to be a large group, then you need to be in the Zoom session. And a lot of it today is going to be a PowerPoint where each participant is going to present their 3, 4, or 5. There's a couple of cases where I allowed up to 6 images. And so each person is going to get to talk through their images, and then we're going to have a major general discussion in the aftermath. So I would expect that this session is going to go for more than 3 hours this afternoon, is what I guess, because I have 75 slides of people's presentations. So anyway,
epic.
Yeah, it's going to be epic. And so next week, we're still in part 2 of Dr. Eisenstat's essay. Next week, he's talking about, for the last 30 years, I have traveled to the big sky state of Montana. Now, I'm not going to say more about that, but we're still in the second part of his essay, and then there's a third part also. So we have a ways to go before we finish with Stephen Aizenstat. And so I hope this has been useful to you. We still have 18 people watching on YouTube, which is
That's excellent.
Yeah,
that's excellent.
Well, it means that probably over 200 people have been here during the 3 hours at some point. So thank you all for joining us this morning, and we will see you later today. Take care now.